Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast,
the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Thank you for the download. I am excited for you to hear from Christina Nowak. Many of you will recognize that name. She's been mentioned several times in several episodes, but was a guest early on in the show talking about CrossFit and geriatrics. She was starting her PhD and doing small group fitness classes in a CrossFit box. And so she was blending two opposing worlds, that many would say, but she's doing an amazing job, and her work quickly has grown into a full-fledged business that she's starting very soon. So we dive into the new venture of StaveOff and what that entails, some lessons learned along the way, and lots of practical advice for you and me, the practicing clinician. So I'm excited for you to hear what she's up to now. So without further ado, here is Christina Nowak. Christina Nowak, welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So you are another repeat offender. I'm having you back on because, man, this was way back when you were on. You were just starting your PhD, I think.
Yep. I know Chris beat me to it. I was thinking about that the other day.
It's all good. So yeah, you started your PhD. Told us a little bit about StaveOff.ca, and a lot has changed since then. So let's start with the PhD. How's that going? What's new with that?
Yeah, the PhD is going wonderfully. So for people who haven't seen the first episode, I started my PhD in September of this year at McMaster University in the School of Rehabilitation Science. And basically, the underlying thread to my PhD is this concept of prevention. And so advocating for intervening before something has happened or some incident of disability has occurred, and trying to advocate for rehab professionals that we're the ones that can really have this big role to play. And so I'm looking at two different groups. One group is people who are labeled as having preclinical disability. So these are older adults who don't necessarily identify as being disabled, but because of different underlying issues, need to modify the way, the frequency, or their environment in order to complete any task that they're doing day to day. So an example would be if somebody's getting up out of a chair, and Dustin, you probably see this all the time in home health, they can get up, but they rely on the armrests. They need to use them or else they probably couldn't. If you ask them to cross their arms over their chest and get up, it would be way, way more challenging. Yeah. So that's just kind of an example of the preclinical disability label. Mm-hmm. And so we tried to identify these people within the community, and then we started a pilot randomized control trial. And in that randomized control trial, we used two different strength training protocols. And we're trying to see if we can kind of delineate what the optimal protocol is for older adults who are labeled as preclinical disability. And so the one was high intensity, and so we call it HEART, so high intensity enhanced resistance training.
That sounds so catchy.
I know, right? The acronyms in academia, they love them. It's amazing. And so with this, we're doing, 3 sets of 5 at a heavy weight of squats, deadlifts, press, bench press, row. Mm-hmm. And obviously we have to do a little bit of tweaks for people who have different orthopedic presentations going on. But the idea is that we're trying to do complex multi-joint exercises for that kind of more closely resemble some of the things that we do day to day.
Okay.
And then the other group is a low intensity group. So a little bit more of 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12, single joint exercises. So a lot of times ankle weights, knee extensions, calf raises, clamshells, things like that. A little bit more, I would say, conventional PT, kind of the strength training stuff you see a little bit more in an outpatient orthopedic clinic, though that idea is changing, which is wonderful. But so we're comparing the two. So people generally, they haven't had any strength training. So we expect that both groups are going to do very well. Mm-hmm. But we're trying to see if the high intensity group may not only be safe and feasible, but something that may show a little bit more benefit because of its relation to some of the things people do day to day.
Yeah. When are you measuring with the outcomes? Is that soon, or have you already done that?
Yeah, it's really soon. So my first wave is done this week. So they go into post-assessment next week.
Okay.
So we did it in 3 waves, and we're doing it at 2 sites. So by the end of June, we should be done and collecting data, and then we'll be in the analysis phase. And then actually, our team just received funding through the Canadian Frailty Network to extend this project, which is wonderful. So we'll be extending into a pre-frailty cohort. So people who are at risk for that vulnerable geriatric syndrome of frailty, and we'll be doing some bone mineral density scans to see about osteopenia and sarcopenia pre and post exercise intervention, as well as kind of looking at healthcare utilization costs to see if these prevention programs, we can make an argument that it really decreases the economic burden on the healthcare system as well as increases people's functional ability.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Do you are you doing this at that CrossFit box, or where are these classes taking place?
Yeah, so we're doing it at Element and CrossFit Industry. So Element's in Mississauga. I've been a physio there for the last 3 years, and as my facility opens, I'll be transitioning out. But we'll still be doing the research trials at that space, which is incredible because it's in the community. A lot of times these research programs, they get done in university settings or nursing home or long-term care facilities and things like that, which is wonderful because a lot of times they are able to get that space. But I thought it was really interesting that we were able to do these trials in, a community small box gym, and
Right.
and it's been really interesting seeing how people coming into the study have interacted with some of the members of the gym and things like that. So it's been really great.
Yeah. So how did that relationship develop? Because I'm sure there's some listeners that are really amped up about this idea, and the fact that you're doing it in a local business, a local CrossFit box. How did you strike up the relationship with the owner of that box to be able to have these types of classes and trials there?
Yeah, so I work at Element, so I'm the physiotherapist that's been there. So Alex and I have developed that relationship over the last couple of years. But when it came to something developing in Collingwood, I ended up having a relationship with the coach who's doing the exercise program, in Collingwood. So her parents actually are part of my private program.
Awesome.
So she's a really strong believer in the power of exercise and seeing kind of how it's helped shape her parents' life and their ability levels. And so she actually volunteered to allow me to use the space. And then we set up a meeting with the owners of the gym up in Collingwood, who were amazing and letting us use the space and kind of gave us an in-kind contribution in order to let us do the trial. So I guess for anyone who's looking to try and develop these type of programs, from if you're staying outside of the research and going into kind of the business type of model, a lot of times people want to get into this space. They think it'd be wonderful, but they just don't really know where to start. So if you have that expertise, then that's a really great conversation that you can start opening with some of the local business owners.
Yeah, that's good. So since September, in terms of coaching, how are you different as a coach, or what big lessons have you learned in this period of time?
Oh my goodness. That's a big question. So I think so I work primarily with older adults, a lot of chronic conditions. I have a couple of gentlemen who have had previous strokes. I have somebody who is not a surgical candidate but has an active hole in his aorta.
Wow.
So I have a lot. So building a rapport with the people that you are working with is really important because you need to know and you need to listen. And I think I've become a little bit of a better listener. But I think that if you're not having a little bit of anxiety and worry, then sometimes you're not doing it right. I'm always kind of thinking, is this the right thing to do? And kind of modifying from there. And so I think I've become a little bit more of a reflective practitioner as well, because we don't like to admit, but sometimes we make mistakes, or I'll go and I'll push too far or not push enough, or this person doesn't feel like they got a good workout, or there was too much of a workout. And it's always trying to find that balance point. And so I think working with people in a private setting, but also having the knowledge from the academic setting has given me a really well-rounded kind of look at these issues and trying to kind of find that middle ground.
Yeah. What does your on-ramp look like to get into some of these classes? Not necessarily, the ones with the trial per se, but, just some of these higher intensity classes that are doing these, compound functional movements, lifting some heavy stuff. What does the on-ramp look like nowadays?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of times I like to do a full physio assessment. The APTA actually advocates for older adults to do a preventative physio assessment every year. And that hasn't translated so much into some of the Canadian literature, but I'm hoping that it will soon. Mm-hmm. But we kind of do the first day a person comes in, we sit down and we talk a lot. I ask as many questions as I can to get a good idea about how this person is doing around the home, and doing a lot of listening about, what their goals are, what their challenges are, and what their past medical history is. Mm-hmm. And then I try and do a couple of one-on-one sessions just to start teaching the basic movements, the hip hinge, how to get up from a chair. Sometimes I do progressions to get on and off the floor. That's a really big deal for me. Mm-hmm. And kind of just seeing where the person's at. And then when they're in the group program, I have a hard cap. I won't go over 8 people in a class. Especially when it's just me, because it's with the variation in different ability levels, it's really difficult to monitor and make sure that everyone's kind of safe. But I have a lot of people now who've been in the program for a year and a half, and so they become mentors to the people that are newer. So it creates a really nice dynamic, and it helps people feel more welcome. And it also helps me because they know so much of what they're doing that they can kind of be that coach as well. So the personal training and the one-on-one, or the physio assessment at the beginning, I think is really, really important, especially for people who have some complications, just so that they get a rapport with you. Because sometimes, the first time you see a person, they don't spill their guts. So having that one-on-one and developing that rapport gets me to learn a lot about the information that I need to know.
That's cool. So anyone that follows you online on Twitter, your Facebook page, they see the pictures that you post and the videos, and it's really inspiring because how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Dustin, did you just ask me my age?
I did. I could edit it out.
I'm 26.
All right, 26. So it's amazing because you're 26 years old and doing these programs, and you have people, what seem to be, 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe older. I don't know. But just that huge age gap, and you're taking them through these very difficult activities, these strenuous exercises, and it's just so cool to see your ability to kind of gather people around this movement or a mission, and what I imagine is most of the people were probably not familiar with this type of exercise or activity prior to, but I think it speaks pretty loudly to your ability to connect with people, to influence them, and just to encourage them as well. So, do you have any advice for someone that may be in kind of a coaching role that wants to gather people together to do some stuff like this? Because I imagine it wasn't easy, but it seems like you got a pretty awesome tribe up there in Canada now.
Yeah, I have the best group. We go out all the time. So
that's awesome.
I think that's amazing. Advice. So I have a couple of things. As I've started working with older adults, and I get to talk with them a lot of times, and I posted about this on my blog, is that some of the adults that I work with, they feel like once they get older that they stop being listened to. And I wrote something too about this concept of elder speak, and saying to someone who's in their 70s who's trying really hard to get some of their abilities left and being like, "You're so cute. Oh, you're just adorable." And I think that changes the dynamic and changes the relationship. And so if you want to be working with older adults, you're peer to peer when it comes to your dynamic with them, in my opinion. And I think one of the biggest things is just talking to them like they're normal. Like, you don't want to create this power differential, because it really is, how do you feel today, and kind of what can we do, and having this conversation. And so I think sometimes people who want to get into working with geriatrics and older adults, they have amazing intentions, but sometimes they have to be a little bit more conscientious of their language and their listening. Because I've had even a person in my research trial, I'll never forget her telling me this. She was going into a furniture store asking she was going to spend thousands of dollars on furniture. And the salesperson coming in she said it wasn't necessarily what she was saying. It was the tone of voice that she was speaking to her with. And she's almost 80 years old. And she said, I left the store because, we're not talking person to person. You're talking to me almost as if I'm a child. And so I think sometimes we're not, with the best of intentions, we're not aware of some of the language or some of the nonverbal communication that we can set across. And I think that gets picked up way quicker than we may anticipate. And so I think that was a big realization for me, just being able to have these conversations, especially because I can develop this rapport because I see people multiple times a week for an hour. And so just getting into some of those conversations, I think that was one of the big light bulb moments for me. And I've started to become very vocal about some of my struggles, and, trying to talk with my peers about some of the language and nonverbal communication that we use, especially when we're working with our older clients, and just being aware. It becomes a respect thing in the end, even if it's not meant to be disrespectful.
Yeah. And that blog post that you mentioned, I'll definitely link that in the show notes, and that is on my list for senior rehab shorts. So I will be reading that, and hopefully we'll do it justice as well. But you bring up a good point, and it's definitely the case, for many people. I remember it makes me think of when I was in the nursing home, and just when we would bring patients into the rehab gym, and I'm definitely guilty of this, but several of the other therapists their older adult voice was very similar to like their puppy voice or their baby voice, like the high pitched, oh, hey, cute, just that type of language and that type of tone. And yeah, if you put yourself in the shoes of that person, that older adult, the patient, that would not be fun.
Yeah. The instant thought would be that they would be thinking, well, you're old enough to be my daughter. And if my daughter talked to me that way.
Yeah. I'd slap her right across the cheek.
Yeah, exactly. She'd get a licking for sure.
Yeah. Or slap the taste out of your mouth. That's what my grandmother would say. For sure. So let's give us the update on StaveOff, because you got a lot going on. You got this awesome trial that you've been working on. You got your PhD going, and then you started StaveOff.ca, and now you're kind of opening the next chapter in this journey. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So StaveOff is becoming a physical entity, which is so exciting. Mm-hmm. A little bit stressful right now as I'm going through construction aches and pains. My fiance and I are both kind of in full construction mode. Wow. But so basically what ended up happening is, as I was trying to build the private program, there were certain things about being in a gym environment that made it a little bit challenging for some of my boomers that are in the program. And for example, a lot of times you're in a big industrial gym, and so the acoustics can be really bad for older adults who have various degrees of hearing loss, for example, and the music is usually loud, and people who are in the middle of the workout may not be as conscientious that there's an older adult who may have balance issues, just things like that. Yeah. And so what my fiance and I started talking about is that wouldn't it be really awesome to be able to not have a program that's a component of a gym, but have a gym that is dedicated to these type of programs. And I come from a really interesting perspective, and I feel very fortunate because doing my PhD as well as being a practicing clinician, that translation of knowledge based on what's coming out in the research and what I'm able to perform the next day has a very quick turnover. And so I can really take things that are coming out in the literature and start trying to apply them into my own setting. And so we were kind of thinking about this business model around prevention and trying to intervene, not only rehabbing people with different orthopedic injuries or different chronic conditions to get them back up to baseline, but also having these programs that can have people coming in who have these chronic conditions, who know they need to exercise, but don't necessarily have that confidence to start an exercise program and don't have that accountability. And so physio is going to be interlaced in all of the programs that we're running. We're looking at running, we have a program that we're going to start called Prime, which is very similar to the Boomers program in that it's trying to kind of just keep your body primed, keep your body moving and functioning as we progress through our life and we start getting a little bit older. We start noticing things start to slow down, and we're trying to just decelerate that loss of function. And then we're going to try and do something around falls prevention, and we're also going to try and do something around chronic disease self-management. So a lot of older adults over the age of 65 have at least one chronic condition. I think the Fontana's article was about 70%.
Wow.
And so, which is huge. And so if a person knows how to manage that chronic condition, then they can still continue to age healthily and age successfully into their 7th, 8th, 9th decade of life. And so we're really trying to kind of create this new idea. And we're trying to, there isn't a really good business model for something that's around prevention. I'm sure the rehab professionals who are listening are totally shaking their heads because we have this skill set that everyone says is great in the sphere of prevention, but in terms of college guidelines around prevention and kind of what is okay and not okay is a very gray area. So we're kind of trying to dive head first and see kind of what comes out the other end.
That's incredible. So the physiotherapy, are you offering kind of the traditional one-on-one physiotherapy services for, someone that has some aches and pains or, just has some issues that they want resolved?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
And so we'll do, I'm not a very strong soft tissue therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't, that's not my go-to, especially with some of my older clients. So I am a really exercise-based therapist. And so a lot of times it'll be trying to, cater that exercise program to get them back into a less painful or pain-free state. And then I want to really start advocating for having those health promotion conversations with some of our clients, because I think physios have a really great opportunity to have those conversations, and yet we don't have them as often as we should.
Yeah. So
things around, like staying active outside, even if it's not my programs, but allowing people to have the resources to get into another exercise program, trying to get their, try and get them with their family doing outings. That's a social thing and creates more accountability, having those conversations around sleep and stress and nutrition and things that are super important, not only to just recovery from orthopedic injury, but for lifelong well-being. And I think that physios have a really huge role that they can play.
That's awesome. Can I ask you specific questions about kind of how the operations and kind of the setup of the clinic?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that all right?
Yeah, I might have some I don't knows yet.
That's all good.
I answer as best as I can.
So, because these are questions that I have when because I see what you're doing. I'm like, that's freaking awesome, and it's definitely it draws up ideas in my mind, because what you're doing is basically everything that we talk about on this podcast, but under one roof, and that makes me very excited. So some questions that come to mind: how are there any services that you are going to use for like documentation and billing?
You mean like CRM software?
Yeah, like software. I guess it may be a little different. So something like in here in the States would be like WebPT, for example.
Right. I looked at WebPT actually.
Yeah.
Actually, that's an interesting that was your first question. So Nick and I struggled a little bit in terms of developing a CRM software just because of the two streams.
Mm-hmm.
So because we have a private program that's going to be a recurring billing, a lot of the billing software that's targeted towards clinicians don't have that function.
Wow.
Yes, which is just a consequence of the way that our models and our business structures are currently. So we ended up using a gym software called MindBody that we're going to try and test out to see how that goes, because it has an ability to bill for one instance and we're allowed to kind of, link the registration number and everything so that it can go through insurance as well as have the recurring billing. That being said, the EMR structure in it, the electronic medical record, is very rudimentary. And so we don't know if we're going to try it, see. We end up having to upload a bunch of documents, but we may have to have two separate systems, which could be a little bit of a pain in the butt, or we just have to go classic, pen and paper type of thing.
What's that? Paper?
Yeah, paper.
I don't understand.
I know, right?
I'm just kidding.
Well, you know what? The States is actually way more ahead of us. I don't even know if that's English. They're way more advanced than us in terms of, getting onto the EMR, because some of our hospitals are still pen and paper.
Yeah.
And we know that in the States, you're pretty transitioned over into EMR.
Yeah. So. A lot of the places are. I don't know if that's a good thing per se. It can make documentation somewhat easier, but the time that I spend, and I know many others spend documenting, is ever increasing, and it's So I don't. Yeah, paper may not be a bad thing.
I know.
When you think
There's
about
always
it.
that argument, right?
Yeah. So MindBody. I'm familiar with Zen Planner, but I haven't used MindBody yet. So that's cool. What? In terms of specifics of the layout, because I know I've been looking at pictures and you basically had a blank slate to do, whatever you wanted, it seems. And you all are putting up walls and making treatment rooms and all that. And you kind of touched on this before in terms of trying to make the place a quieter space. But are there any other specifics, big things that that are kind of features of your clinic that is really catering to the population that you're serving?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a couple of things that I'm really excited about. I just actually posted a video on YouTube that kind of shows the layout of the space. So it's 4,000 square feet.
Wow.
It's massive, which is amazing. So we have a 1,500 square foot, kind of more of a classic physio space where we have a reception area and then we have a hallway that goes into 3 treatment rooms. And then we have a sliding door that has access from the clinic to the gym space. And the gym space is 2,500 square feet that kind of encapsulates the clinic.
Gosh. How tall are the ceilings?
They're 12 feet to the beam, 14 feet total.
Okay.
So they're taller ceilings. A couple of things that we really considered with the design is that everything is completely accessible. So we have two doors. Both are going to be motorized doors. One that goes into the clinic for people who may be a little bit more intimidated by coming into a gym setting. And then we have a separate entrance that goes into the gym itself.
Okay.
So from an access perspective. And then all of our doors into the clinic and around the space are 36 inches wide. So in Canada, and I'm not sure about the legislation in the States, we have something called the Access for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, AODA. And it's a stepwise progression that has a main objective of having every business be accessible for any individual in Canada to be able to access the space. And so we really considered their end goals when we kind of designed the space. So all of our doors are really wide. We have a bathroom that is, I believe it's 12 by 10. And so grab bars, we're going to have a motorized door that's at a wheelchair height. We have enough room for an adult change table within the space. Just a whole bunch of considerations around that. There isn't a lot of tight corners or ways to navigate so that individuals who do have mobility impairments or different disabilities will not have issues when they're traveling and navigating within that space.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a bar? Are you putting a keg in there or anything like that?
No, but it's funny that you asked that. So I started asking some of my clients, if you had a space that was catered just for you, what would you want? And the biggest one that I got was a social space.
Yeah.
The biggest. And so we actually, at the front of the gym, we're going to do like kind of like a sit down coffee, coffee type little environment, little nook, so that people after they finish working out can still stay back and kind of have that social experience. And so maybe not alcohol, cool. But caffeine is a drug of different senses, I guess.
Yes. So the group classes, I've thought about this a lot. I don't know what I would do, but so you have someone coming in, or you have several people coming in that are at very different ends of the spectrum in terms of their physical ability, I imagine. Mm-hmm. What's your plan for this? Are you going to break up your classes by ability, or just have classes where anyone can come in and you're just going to be diligent on just scaling, the workout appropriately for each person? How do you tackle that?
An amazing question. And I think the easiest answer is we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Depending on kind of the demographic and the people that come into our space. At first, I know we're going to try and be diligent in trying to just cater everyone in the same kind of group. But down the road, that just may not be something that's possible. In the CrossFit sphere, sometimes they'll do like CrossFit Light and CrossFit. And that may be a model that we'll have to think about adopting down the road. To be honest, I don't really know. I don't really know how it's going to go. It would be nice if we could include everybody, but there's also, sometimes considerations that people who are really not doing well don't want to, have everyone else seeing them and things like that, like just different considerations that we'll have to kind of be conscientious of and reflective of as we start going through some of the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, that's tough because there's good and bad with that. I mean, it would definitely create some separation amongst a group, which, may not be a good thing, but then it could allow for, just people to really get after it or have the activity scaled to them. That's tough though.
So the private program that I'm in now has a huge range of ability levels as well. And it's actually ended up being a really strong motivator. And it's never been that I do better than you type of mentality. It's always been very community-based, very supportive. Mm-hmm. And so from that experience, I feel like it will be something that we can kind of scale based on who's in the group. But that being said, when we try and scale it 10x, you never know.
Yeah. How, other than the people that you already work with, how are you reaching your city, your town?
Yeah. So the really interesting piece is that Nick and I are actually moving completely out of the city that we're in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're moving about 3.5 hours away from where we've kind of created our programs. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One is that Toronto is insanely busy and Nick's from a really small town. So there's a whole bunch of considerations. Anyways, so we don't really know anybody in the city that we're in. Mm-hmm. And so we've been trying to do a lot of outreach. As a physio and as a PhD student, I'm trying to kind of create connections with the local university. We've kind of done some outreach to the local Chamber of Commerce and BIA groups to try and, get the word out there to different other small businesses to try and create those networks. And pretty much we're trying to do different direct marketing, content marketing, things like that. Some of the traditional marketing strategies, especially when we're working with an older demographic where sometimes the different social media platforms, they're just not uptaking those platforms at the same rate as if we were targeting someone who is a little bit younger. Mm-hmm. So Facebook tends to be my avenue of choice.
Okay.
So, we're just trying to do a whole bunch of different ideas and kind of see what hooks and go from there.
That's very valuable data that I'm sure you're going to collect. And if you are willing to share what works and what doesn't work, I know many people would definitely be interested in that. Granted, I know each city, each town's going to be a little different, but that'll be some interesting information to see, what really works for you moving into that new space. Oh,
definitely. I would definitely share all of that.
Yeah. So how close are you to old Dr. Scotty Butcher now?
We're provinces away. We're hours and hours.
All right. So not as close as I thought.
Well, we were talking about, I know there's, especially Ontario, like to get from one end of Ontario to the other, it's like 20 hours to try and drive. Man. But we were actually talking about potential ways of collaborating down the road. So the internet creates connections very quickly, which is wonderful. So
it's a beautiful thing.
It is. It really
Well, that's awesome. I'm really excited for you. And is it Nick?
Yeah.
Yes, your fiance, Nick. And just, just looking through the website, talking with you, it's really encouraging. And I'm just excited to see what happens because you're definitely paving the way for a different type of space. And you're really catering to the people that we talk about on this podcast a lot. So I know a lot of people are definitely going to want to support you. So the last question that I'm going to ask, because I've already asked you all my standard questions, but the last one that I want to ask is how can I and then the listeners support you in this endeavor? What could we do to help you out?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that question. I was just...
Gotcha.
That's wonderful. So obviously trying to get Stave Off on the map is kind of the number one. Like I've been trying to do a lot of content marketing to create this conversation around prevention. But I think the biggest thing is just to start having those conversations around prevention. If anything, letting some of the material that I talk about, start becoming more common. The way that we speak to our clients, our thoughts around our roles in terms of health promotion and healthy behavior modeling. I think that's the biggest thing. If we can really be, as a profession, starting to think about that sphere of prevention and what we can do, then I think that will be the biggest thing for helping Stave Off get off the ground.
Awesome. All right. So where can people find you on the interwebs? Because I know they're going to want to pick your brain and take a look at what you're up to.
Yeah, definitely. So www.staveoff.ca, I was going to say .com, it's .ca, is our website. We're on Facebook as well. And then my Twitter handle is at Christina Nowak 3. I'm definitely not as active on Twitter as you are, but I do try and, if people are reaching out to me, I do try and get back to them as soon as I can. It's been a little bit crazy busy with the construction, but I do try and get back to everyone. And I would love to hear from everyone and kind of what they've struggled with and some of the things that maybe have worked for them that could help me. That conversation, I think, is going to be super important because I even was talking to some healthcare professionals yesterday, and it created this really, I don't want to say heated, but charged conversation because I think a lot of us are thinking the same thing, but in terms of how we navigate is where that big question mark lies. So those conversations, I think, are going to be so important.
Yeah. All right. All the links that she just mentioned will be in the show notes. And once again, I encourage everyone listening to go to StaveOff.ca to see what Christina and Nick are up to. A really pretty website, very clear mission. And it's going to be exciting to see, what's going to happen in the future. So thanks again, Christina. I appreciate your time this morning.
Oh, thanks, Dustin. I really appreciate it.
Hit me. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. The show notes and much, much more can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. I want to encourage you to go there so you can join me and many others in the movement that's changing the face of geriatric rehab. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com, click join, and you'll be able to get access to our private Facebook group, which can basically serve as your virtual mastermind group. You'll get a short and sweet monthly email from me with useful links for you and your patients. And lastly, you'll get 10% off your first purchase from the Senior Rehab store. So all of this can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. And until next time, my friends, do not forget to stay funky.